Today marks the 4th Africa Pretrial Detention Day, a day to raise awareness of the plight of thousands of people who are held in detention in police cells and prisons across Africa for prolonged periods without trial. The situation in Madagascar is, however, worsening, according to Amnesty International. It says excessive use of pretrial detention in the island nation is unjust and abusive and has now reached crisis levels with up to 14,000 people held. According to the human rights body, the number of pretrial detainees exceeds the total capacity of the country's prisons. These detainees are held in appalling conditions that pose a threat to their lives and fall far short of international, regional and national human rights law and standards. The latest information comes just 6 months after the organization exposed the country's pretrial situation in a previous report.
We'll talk in detail about these figures reported by Amnesty International, and we're joined on the line by Tamara Light, Program Advisor at Amnesty International. Good morning, Tamara. So between 2017 and 2019, you noted that the number of detainees awaiting trial has increased from more than 11,000 to 14 people. Should we conclude that despite the many warnings to the Malagasy authorities, nothing is being done to reverse this trend? Yes, since the launch of our report in October 2018, the number of defendants has continued to increase. The proportion of persons in pretrial detention has remained similar, still at over 50% and approaching 55%. And among these 14,000 people awaiting trial are a large majority of men, but also nearly 900 women and 650 minors, some of whom are as young as 13 years old. So Amnesty International continues to alert the government to the urgent need to address this problem. First of all, by ensuring that preventative detention is an exception and that when it is really necessary, it is used only for a very limited time because each individual has the right to a fair trial within a very short period of time.
And we know that prisons in many countries have exceeded their capacity to accommodate them. But how can we understand for Madagascar's case that the justice system continues to send people to prison without even judging them?
In fact, we're facing a collapse of the judicial system in Madagascar, and this is the consequence of a lack of priority that's been going on for decades. To describe prisons to you, they are often more than 100 years old with very little rehabilitation work. So there are walls that are literally collapsing. Detainees are kept in large courtyards and there's no individual cells. They all sleep in the same room, often on the floor. The defendants are not separated from those who have been found guilty. So this is contrary to international, regional, and even Malagasy law itself. In the case of Madagascar, the explanation lies in the fact that the judicial authorities do not respect their own laws. Instead of using alternatives to detention as required by the national law, police on the one hand and judges on the other use preventive detention abusively. Our research has shown that this is often done with a view to punish. So, Tamara, what are the models that Madagascar and even other countries can use to address this issue, which could also reduce prison overcrowding? It's very simple, actually. The judicial authorities must stop using preventive detention for each case because it really violates a large number of human rights. For example, the right to the presumption of innocence, the right to live in a dignified condition, the right to a speedy trial. There are a number of alternatives to detention in our national laws. For example, community service or bail. There are countries in Africa that have managed to reduce their number of defendants quite dramatically, so we know that it is feasible. It is just a matter of political will. And what is really unfortunate is that it is the poorest and most marginalized people who are most at risk of going into pretrial detention because they cannot have a lawyer to defend themselves. And once they are in prison, it is also these same poor people who are at risk of more than suffering from long-term detention conditions.
sur le long terme.
As we wait for the situation to improve in Madagascar, Tamara, what do you think is a matter of urgency for the time being, like in the case where children are detained with adults, as you've just mentioned?
Judicial reforms often take a long time, but in this case, there are a number of things that can be done very quickly and without an extra budget. So it is really on these requests that Amnesty International will insist on this year. First, the situation of young children and women. Women are often in pretrial detention with their babies or young children because no one else can keep them. Without access to a lawyer for minors who do not justify their detention, and especially for long periods. So we're asking that they be tried immediately or that they be released. Children who are also in pretrial detention are also detained mainly for minor offenses. For example, in one establishment where I was, out of 14 children, 10 were there for chicken thefts, for rice thefts, for food, for example. Some of the most serious crimes, children can wait more than 2 years to have a trial. And during those 2 years, they stopped going to school for those who were going. Often they have little or no contact with their families, and this creates a great psychological deficiency. Another problem for children that is very serious is that they are not separated from adults, which obviously represents physical and psychological risks. And international law requires that all minors be strictly separated from adults during detention.